welcome to the Groundwork show, where we interview the leaders building the most interesting ecosystem businesses in the world. My name's Ty Rattigan, your host, and I am very pleased to have Cory Snyder here with me today. Cory, I would love to start by just learning a little bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, first and foremost, thanks for having me on. It's exciting. My journey's an interesting one. I would consider I figured out early on that I liked sales, and and then I was somewhat good at it, and I'm extremely competitive. So that competitiveness really drove the conversation around how do I do more with what I've been given, and so I went into sales and went into a company called InfusionSoft. They were about 10 million in revenue. This was about 13 years ago, back in 2008. And from there, basically was like, I'm getting the same leads everybody else is. My conversion rate is just as good as everybody. I'm beating everybody, but like, how do I start gapping? How do I like secure my next couple months, basically? And I started just researching how these prospects were coming in, and it come to find out a lot of them were referrals. So I reached directly out to these relationships that were not being supported, and basically just said, hey, I'd love to be your direct point of contact. I'm the number one sales rep here at InfusionSoft, and would love to have you guys send your traffic directly to me, and I'll make sure that you guys get the highest conversion rate and the most commission that you possibly can out of it. And I'll make your customers look good, and I'll make you look good, basically. And so I started doing that, did that for about 2 years, and was basically 2 months ahead of everybody every year on revenue. And the company's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing this. And I told everybody I was doing it, and only one person out of like 20 were willing to even try it. Funny enough.
Crazy.
And so eventually, 2 years after I started doing this, they said, you want to build a team? I said, yeah. So I took over referral partners, affiliates, and what we called a dead program that was called CMAX, Certified Marketing Automation Coaches, and completely rebuilt it and revamped it. And we started crushing it. We were doing 500 new accounts a month. We were competing and beating almost the direct sales team, and a couple times we beat the direct sales team in just a small team of 5 people. So it was exciting. And so I rolled that into working for Active Campaign and some other diversification here and there with tech partnerships and things like that. And so over the last 13 years, I've been just rebuilding and building and consulting and doing those sort of things for companies.
Amazing. Yeah. And I'd love to start there with InfusionSoft, because that volume of new customers is really high, especially with such a small team. Really interested to dig into that. So tell me a little bit more about the type of partners that you had, the type of accounts they were sending you, and what was it about what you were doing that incentivized them to send you quite so many customers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there was a couple elements in play. One was this was early marketing automation world, right? InfusionSoft was one of the dominating companies, along with Entreport, and then HubSpot was relevant at that point in time. They were a little more mid-market, right? So these companies that I was competing with were mostly working with the larger SMBs to SMBs. So at that point in time, partnerships wasn't necessarily a thing. It wasn't this, act like everybody's doing it, all that kind of good stuff. It was kind of like this weird thing that happened in the ether of cool referrals, but how do I drive growth through that? So it was fun because partially I had zero support externally like we have today. It was really trial and error. And so what we decided to do is we ended up to have a control factor, we did a certification process. So every partner that was an InfusionSoft partner had to be certified, and they had to fly in. So they had to do 3 days on location at the office. And it cost them, I think, $2,000 is what we charged back then to be a certified partner. And the idea behind it was that we didn't have a ton of partners, tons of opportunity in the market. We were a growing marketing automation platform. We were one of the dominant ones at that point in time. So branding was there, our name was there, we had momentum, and we had customers that had needs, right? And these partners basically saw the opportunities. Agencies saw the opportunity to say, I'm going to partner with them, and I'm going to go basically drive marketing automation for dentists and for this vertical and that vertical and that vertical that InfusionSoft wasn't focusing on. And so that's what we went deep on. every partner that came on, I went through their entire list of customers and said, which ones do you like working with and which ones have the most success? And
Mm.
they said, this one. I said, okay, you've already built all the content for this other customer. Let's rebuild it so we can go to the masses. And let's come up with a go-to-market strategy to actually drive third-party revenue, right? Commission third-party revenue through Infusionsoft, but drive you a crap ton of service revenue.
Yeah.
So I would help them build out their pricing structures, their service offerings from 3 plans. The first 2 focused on money concerns, and the second 2, the middle and the last one, focused on time concerns, right? So you do it, done for you kind of methodology. And we basically built this business in a box for a lot of partners where we could get them up and running in 30, 60 days, onboarding customers and selling. And we got to a point where we were pumping out 1,000, 1,500 certified partners is what we had. We were doing 500 deals a month by the time I left. So, and they were selling them, they were supporting them. What we were doing is supporting them on the go-to-market actions. Where's their missed opportunity? Where's our opportunity? Where is Infusionsoft not focusing? And so on. And so we just gave them that. And then we gave them tips and tricks on ways that, hey, this partner's crushing it doing this. Why don't you do the same thing? And we built this really cool community that helped each other also. So that's a whole nother element too, is we built this whole community on Facebook group that literally helped each other, all competitive for the most part, right? But they'd be like, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm doing. We built this really cool cult following almost that I don't know if I'll ever be able to replicate. But that's really what we did, and that's really how we drove it, is leverage the community, but we also prescribed the crap out of our partners.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and I mean, one of the things, so building out the partner program at Optimizely around a similar time, like I had a similar feeling to what you're describing, where it's like, and I was an SDR who basically figured out that this was like the easiest way for me to get opportunities was to go and partner. So it's like very similar point in time. And I think one of the thing that's like really obviously different, but like one of the things that really stood out to me about what you were saying was it sounded like you were able to find partners that were like really trying to grow. Like they were really motivated to go out and do business.
Yes.
And I imagine one of the gates or one of the forcing functions for having those is like, hey, you have to pay money in order to get trained. Most people don't do that. Most people are like, hey, partners will fly you out, like, please come and do our training, we love you, you know. And you're like, hey, you have to pay us if you want to get trained. But like, what were some of the other filtering criteria or whatever else, like what indicators that you saw where you were like, hey, these people really want to, like, we're going to prescribe what they should do, but they're going to really like go after it?
Yeah, what's interesting is like we talk a lot about IPP, and I'm a big fan of like, you don't know your IPP until you know it, and you don't know it until you have enough partner data to actually justify it. So partially what we were doing when we first launched this was we just want agencies on, and if they're willing to pay us and they're willing to come in and do it, great. We'll put the time and effort into them and we'll support them.
Yeah.
What we learned early on was that there was just partners that were service partners, and there was partners that were sales and service partners. And then we realized that we can accelerate sales growth by connecting service partners to sales partners, because then the bottleneck of onboarding implementation was mitigated by leveraging the service partners. And so we learned that just through that process. But really what we were looking for initially was like really an agency. We didn't know what an IPP looked like, right? If you were to look at the number one partner for Infusionsoft back in the day, at the very beginning, the company called Get You Wired, Buck. Now they're a 40-person, 50-person agency in Dahlonega, Georgia, and they're crushing it. And they're doing a lot of different things from the implementation process. I started working with them in like 2008, 2009. There was 2 people in the company, and I was just sending them integration work.
Yeah.
So it's like, and so it's tough to sometimes to say like, oh, our IPP is a 40-person agency because they're doing 200 apps a year. When in reality, like, we built that together.
Yeah.
And so then we started digging into, as we got quantity, and we started looking at like, what are consistencies along these agencies? And we started realizing, oh, ones that do this, ones that focus on verticalization, ones that have at least 5 employees and at least $1 million in revenue, those are really good fits, because they're not so, after $1 million, you start getting super deep in your own methodologies, your own flows, your all partnerships. So if I can get in at $1 million and they're not so deep with another partnership, I could potentially move in and really build with them.
Yeah.
And so that's what we learned over time was like, how do we figure out the IPP? Was like, let's just bring on partners. Let's double down on them. We built a playbook. We said, if the partner is within these three different IPPs, this is how we're going to work with them. We're going to, if they're sub 5 employees, we're going to give them suggestions to do landing pages and go to market strategies and stuff like that. If they're after 5 employees, do they have a sales rep that we could specifically assign to these efforts, right? And so it was just this. Really, we had 3 IPPs in reality, and then we had our main one, right? But within that, we had movement for each one of the IPPs to move the ones that were not in the IPP into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah, it totally
Yeah.
makes sense. Like almost like your funnel for getting people
It's a
in the
part.
process.
Yeah, it's a partner journey, and the way like we always looked at it as like a customer's got a journey. Why does a partner not?
Yeah.
Like it should be exactly the same in the sense of the methodology.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. And so I love what you were talking about being really prescriptive with the partners, because I do think that that's really one of the biggest challenges. It's like, hey, whether it's I think particularly with agency partners, it's one of the biggest challenges, but across the board, it's one of the biggest challenges. It's like, hey, you want to do something, we want to do something. Also, like, how do we do something, and like kind of leaving it to the other person to figure this stuff out themselves is definitely like certain failure pretty much.
Yeah.
Although again, like a good filtering process, the people that do figure out tend to be like really, really, really good partners. But so then one of the things I've experienced, at least with agency partners, is, you go in and you're like, hey, there's this amazing service opportunity for you to, like expand your current offering or open a new offering that's kind of somewhat similar to the same customers, or even open up a whole new customer base to you. And everyone's like, oh yeah, this sounds amazing. But then they just work on their existing business because like they're
Yep.
paid on a services model, and like it doesn't financially make sense. The incentives aren't there for them to move people or efforts onto new lines of business, basically. And so, like, how did you get over that hurdle with these types of partners?
Yeah, so part of the process in that playbook is we tried to put together this thing called a BHAG, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal planner. And we try to do that with partners in early on days to basically just say, like, what are the executables? What do you want to accomplish? Right? So obviously you want a partner, but what does that mean to revenue? What is your third-party revenue goal when it comes to InfusionSoft? And then we dive into that, and then we basically lay out go-to-market activities. So like we need to do an email blast, we need to create a landing page, we need to do a webinar, we need to do this or that or whatever, right? And we would basically go through these things and say, what's my responsibility as your partner manager, and what's your responsibility by what date, right? And so we try to come up with a plan. We put as much effort into the individual as the individual put into us. If we had the first call and they didn't execute on what it was, no problem. The second call they didn't. On the third call, we basically just said, let us know when you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved on to another partnership
Yeah.
that was willing to double down. And sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the partnerships, to your point, we doubled down on were not part of our IPP. They were like 2-person agencies, but they were hungry.
Yeah.
They'll basically do whatever we say, right? And so that's really what we did is we just implemented this methodology to where we knew what worked and what didn't work. And that way we could tweak and reiterate over time. And that worked out. It worked really well as far as working with partners that want to work with us. But to your point, I have partners now today at teamwork.com that I'll be like, look, the only people talking about teamwork.com is teamwork.com. There's so much opportunity out there from a service revenue perspective that if you went project management PSA for photographers or for lawyers or whatever it is, you would probably crush it and do a ton of lead generation. And then you could sell them teamwork and the services. But to your point, it's like the ones that really get it, the ones that are hungry will go do it.
Yeah.
But I had that Get You Wired, that company that I mentioned earlier, long friends now. And he came over to be a partner with Teamwork, and he's been using it forever. He's like, Cory, tell me what I need to do. They've been in the agency world forever, and he's still saying, like, tell me how I should go to market with you. So if you don't have a methodology to go to market and steps, then your enablement, your growth of partnerships is going to fail.
Yeah. And so how did that? So it sounds like you built an amazing partner business. you were there for like almost 10 years at Infusionsoft, like a really good
Yeah.
run. And then you went into a couple of other roles where you basically like built this. You basically invented partnerships at Infusionsoft, right? And then you're moving on to other companies and you're having to figure out partnerships again. I would love to hear like some of the things that you took across that worked, both at ZenReach and Active Campaign, and then also like some of the things that you thought would be able to like be transposable but didn't work as well.
Yes, that's a good question. So for the most part, it was a lateral kind of move if you were to think about it from a product perspective, from Infusionsoft to Active Campaign. Active Campaign was a little more downstream as far as smaller micro businesses, but for the most part, they had a little bit different program too. So they had a reseller program for like full reseller program versus Infusionsoft had a program where we owned the paper, but the partner sold the whole account, right? So it was a different, almost there was white labeling and some other things. So there was a lot of learnings that go into on the Active Campaign side, but it also created an opportunity. So digging into the data, digging into the two different groups, affiliates and resellers, I realized early on that a lot of the partners that I knew at Infusionsoft were also partners of Active Campaign, but the agencies were sitting in the affiliate program. And they were sitting in the affiliate program because they didn't want to own the billing. So that's one of the things I had to explain to the company was the profile of a reseller and the profile of an agency, 99% of the time they're dead on the same. The only difference is one owns billing and one doesn't own the billing. If you think about it, reseller does the sales, support, success, and all that of the customer. So does the agency, right? And so that's the way I explained it. And so what we did is we took the learnings from Infusionsoft and their reseller program or their solution or their agency program, and we applied those and created this really cool program that's still, from a system perspective, they're figuring out. But we basically built this ability to say, you control by your customer. So as a partner, an agency partner of Active Campaign, you have the ability to say, I'm going to get 30% on commission, or I'm going to get 30% on the reseller side discount.
Yeah.
You have the ability to choose. You can take 30% commission, or you can take 30% reseller. And within the first month, we generated 300K more in ARR because all of the affiliates that were agencies had a program that they could play in that was aligned to their, versus the transaction, it was aligned to their profile type.
Yeah.
So they moved over and they started selling. And it was just like that. It was that quick. And we didn't take any revenue from the affiliate side because they weren't even doing anything. They weren't selling. They just were activating also. So we took the learnings from that, moved it over to Active Campaign. Where it was interesting, where I didn't think I would be wrong, and I was the Maripost program. So Maripost mid-market diversified my, now I'm going upstream a little bit. I threw up an agency program because there really wasn't, in the mid-market space, there really wasn't anybody doing a great job with ESPs on an agency side. So I was like, oh, we'll crush this, right? Agencies will come in. There's really nobody talking about it. They can come in, drop their services. We don't do any services for the most part. Partners can come in and start selling services to our customers. We're going to crush it on the agency side. Wasn't the case. The first year, 80% of our revenue came from trusted advisors, basically large referral partners.
Yeah.
And influencer type individuals that we had built relationships with. And it was a massive eye-opening to me because I was like doubling down on this program and just letting this one ride. And it was just kept generating revenue. And it was a good eye-opening moment for me to say, it's the exact same reason why I like to go quantity to quality.
Yeah.
Because if I would have doubled down on this one relationship, i.e. Agencies, I would have been screwed.
Yeah.
Right? But looking at it holistically and saying, okay, where's my bread and butter? Where should I actually focus my time? So that was a massive eye opener. And then we ended up just saying, okay, now what's that profile type? And we just use that same methodology around, this one's moving. Let's double down on that. We'll keep warming this one instead of nurturing it. But let's double down on that. And it generated, I think we did $1 million in the first year of that program being in effect. And it was through trusted advisors, affiliates.
Yeah.
So it was like a total eye-opening moment for me to be like, oh shoot, I was wrong.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I really like that, like quantity to quality framework. At Optimizely, we had what felt like a large amount of partners at the time. We had like 150 partners, but it felt like a huge amount of partners for a relatively small team. And
Yeah.
my whole thing when I went to Amplitude was like, okay, I'm just going to have like 5 partners to start with, keep it really small or whatever. And it was like, oh, well, none of these partners are performing, and it was like, okay, no, we have to go really broad and we have to figure out like
Yes.
what the right type of partner is. And we had a similar thing where it's like, I was sure it was going to be digital agencies building mobile apps that was going to be like our sweet spot. And we did have some really good partners in that space, but integration partners was by far our most productive partner business. And for us at Optimizely, that was absolutely nothing. So I was like, I needed the revenue to like really punch me in the face a few times before I switched the strategy. So with that in mind, like it sounded like we both have had to get punched in the face a couple of times being wrong in order to admit that we were wrong, but like we both admitted that we were wrong and followed the revenue. Any tips for people on that, whether either just like, hey, how to check your assumptions, or even just like, yeah, be comfortable with switching strategies? Because obviously the better thing to do is to say, hey, like this bet isn't working, but this other thing's really working, I'm changing strategy.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people just will double down and ultimately end up getting fired because they're not performing. So yeah, we'd love to hear like how you kind of got over that hurdle of switching the strategy. And like I imagine you had to tell people internally, hey, like we're not going to do this thing as much anymore, we're going to do this other thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's scary either way, right? Like it's scary to double down on something that you feel that could work, but it's not, and it's scary to pivot.
Yeah.
At Sendoso, tech partners crushed it. Agencies not, and I had to tell the company, sorry, right now we can't focus on solution partners because we're gonna have to rebuild the whole thing because we already burned them. We asked them for a bunch of referrals and gave them nothing back. So my advice would be sacred cows. There are no sacred cows. Just because you built the program, be willing to say, we need to pivot. The data is showing something different. Always think about your partner program being 80% of the way done forever. And if you always think about it being 80% of the way done, then you're always thinking about what's the next evolution, what's working, what's not working, what levers should I pull to be able to generate this or that or whatever it may be. But I also found that like how you present to your executive team and to your leader is extremely important in the sense of, here are my learnings, swing and a miss, if you will. We assumed based on the data that this would be the route. This is actually showing some additional green shoots or growth here. I think that we should pivot and double down here. And here's my growth strategy for said direction. Mm-hmm. Right. So we thought agencies were going to be the plan. We went 6 months. It generated, $100,000. And this other side of the business that is really starting to grow, we're not supporting, has done double that.
Yeah.
Like, I think we need to put 10% into here, keep it warm, keep it nurturing, keep it going so we don't, ruin what we started. But I think this next year, our growth strategy should be accelerating here. And here's what I think we should do. The biggest issue I found in a lot of the leaders that are coming into partnerships is there's a ton of data out here now, which means there's a ton of noise.
Yeah.
When we were doing partnerships, there was maybe a paperback book from a dude that was at Microsoft doing face-to-face like floppy disk sales, yes. Right? Like there wasn't anything. So it was all trial and error. We didn't have a ton of noise. And so which has its benefits. Don't get me wrong. There's obviously benefits to the digital age, but I would say like the biggest thing for me is like how you present it is massively important. And then how you look at executing is also important. Leaders want to know that they have trust that this individual sees what's going on in the business and is pivoting for it. And then in addition to that, they want to know if they do pivot, they have a plan to go execute. I had a conversation with my partner acquisition person. And I said, hey, it doesn't look like we're seeing a lot of traction going after the HubSpot solution partners. It's okay. It's not bad. But maybe we should pivot and go after the competitor, da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
And she's like, I started last week.
Awesome.
And I'm like, yes, self-awareness. She sees the data and she made the move. And I was like so stoked because it means that she has that awareness that like, hey, things are slowing down here. Let's pick up the gap here. That's what I want to see. Yeah. I want to see that you have a strategy around why we should do what we're going to do. and what resources and support you need from different departments and so on.
Yeah, there's nothing better than having a high agency person on your team that just like owns their success, and it's like, oh, if I'm not being successful here, I'm responsible for that, and I'm going to go and find how to be successful. There's nothing better than that. And that's like,
Nothing better.
oh, it's amazing. So then going from active campaign to Maripost, you went from a director to a VP, and we've kind of talked about, some of the like leadership conversations that you were having and expectation setting and strategy and everything. I'd love to just talk, like, pause here a little bit and talk about that jump from director to VP, because obviously you were a VP then again at Sendoso, and not that titles matter that much, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I feel like once you, like, for instance, when I went to deal, I went back to being a head of, and it was like didn't matter that the title was different, but I was forever operating now at the VP level or like at the executive level, like from my mental frameworks, and like the expectations of a VP are definitely different within businesses.
Yes.
And so I'd love to hear from you, just like, what were some of the things that shifted as you shifted from a director to a VP? What were some of the expectations that were different from the executive leadership team? What were some of the things that you did to set yourself up for success in that new environment?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think, as you move up, you also, it's inherent risk. You're increasing your risk of getting moved on, right? Your pay increases, which makes you more expensive. And so you got to really deliver. And going into getting that VP role, and then within about 60 days, I ended up taking over a full sales team at Maripost and ended up building the sales team and the partner program all at the same time. And what was great learnings, probably not the best decision as far as going to the company for many different reasons, but I got a ton of learnings. And what I mean by that is, one, yes, I got the VP title, which I thought at that point in time was what was important, and now I'm ahead of, and I realize, like, for the most part for me now, like, to your point, like, title's irrelevant. I'm still reporting at the executive level. They still see me at the level that I'm at, even with the head of, even though in our industry head of usually means one person, right? So anyways, tangent, but basically what I figured out early on was, with the VP title, I'm now like on the ELT.
Yeah.
I am in the Maripost. So what that meant is that I can't get away with not knowing the strategy and methodology.
Yeah.
And I had to really understand what was working, what wasn't working. I knew the data. I knew the profitability of my team. Like, I knew all of this different information to say, here's what's working, here's what's not working, here's where we're pivoting, here's what, da 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 da. It came down to a point where it was like, you had to have a plan. There's no like, I think we should do this or I think we should do that. It is, the data says that we should be moving in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I learned super quickly was, one is concise. Also, your PowerPoints, all the communication, keep it concise, bullet points, easily consumable. Then at that point in time, the last questions, and then you got dive in the nitty gritty. So that's what I learned a ton at the ELT level with Maripost. When I moved over to Sendoso, similar thing there, but it was way heavier on creating a methodology and then strategies that roll off of that methodology. And then what does the go-to-market look like? In addition, my speaking increased. They wanted me to speak a lot more and get on stage a lot more to talk about partnerships and do all that kind of stuff. So I had to get comfortable with that and how I presented. And so there was different elements within play, but by far the number one thing that I can say now, because teamwork.com, I'm looked at that similar thing as an executive. They want to know, what is Cory doing in 2024 to hit his number, and what does that look like from a go-to-market perspective? Straight up. Like, and it's not anymore of like, hey Bo or hey John or whoever it is, like what should we doing in brainstorming and stuff like that. You are the throat to choke.
Yeah.
You are the answers, and you have to have them. And that's what I saw the big difference between director was like, I was managing the team and we were doing it, man. Just hit numbers, we're cruising. There's some strategy methodology in place there, but we were really just executing.
Yeah.
At the VP level, the execution is less and the methodology and strategy is way more.
Yeah. And how was your experience? I imagine going to that level, there's a lot more stakeholder management. There's speaking to the company, and then there's also speaking to the rest of the executive leadership team. I'd love to hear about like your experience with that as well, and any kind of tips or any learnings that you had kind of making that transition?
I think it's probably the number one most important thing in a partner program is to make sure that you're articulating clearly into your organization who you are, what you do, and who your partners are. I created a deck I'm presenting to our executive team. I did a week ago, and I'm doing it again on Thursday. And I put a deck together that basically says very simplistically who we are, and what we do. And then I'm going through like, okay, the execution in that, right? But the way that I speak to them is very direct. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. I'm presenting in 2 weeks on a GKO, right, to our sales, marketing, and the rest of the organizations around who our partners are. And I have 4 main slides that are the 4 slides I have in every presentation. It is who we are, what we do, who our partners are, and our vision.
Mm-hmm.
Those are 4 slides that are in every presentation I ever do. And the reason why is because I need everybody to know who our partners are, what we do, who's on the team, so on, right? So the executive team sees the same 4 slides as the company does. The difference is the company, the sales team and marketing teams don't care necessarily about the strategies and the tacticals and the things like that. What they want to see is, how can Cory help me in my day job?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what it is. Like, so I'm presenting on Reveal, I'm presenting on Partner Fleet, I'm showing them examples of how partners have jumped in and helped this sales rep close this deal, or this customer with this integration that saved them and expanded the account, and so on and so forth, right? I'm giving them examples of ways that we could all work together. So the conversation at the executive level is much different than the one that I would present, because those ones are those are the individuals on the front lines. They want to know, how can Cory and the partners help me hit my KPIs?
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. And having that, I think I had it even just for the executive leadership team, just on one slide, like, why does the partnership team exist? Like, how are we measured? Like,
Yes.
what are what's the overall team look like? How we perform it? It's like just one slide. Even if I was presenting something completely different, I'd just be like, hey, quick reminder, like this is where we're at.
Totally.
Now let's talk about giving feedback or whatever,
100%. One of my favorite movies is Inception.
Yeah.
And we have to think about it that way on the partnership side. It's like Inception. When you have your leaders speaking the way you speak, or regurgitating what you've told them, you're starting to win.
Yeah, I heard this great saying. I can't remember where from, but someone said that you're not speaking to an audience; you're speaking to a procession.
Yes.
And like, you might catch someone's attention as they're coming past, but like, you have to be telling people nonstop, just again, and repeat, and eventually it will start to sink in. But if you're not sick of repeating yourself, then people haven't even started understanding what you're saying.
100%. I'd also add, the last thing I'll add on that is, don't give up the opportunity to ask for something.
Mm-hmm.
Every meeting I'm in, I ask for one thing. I say, look, you guys are on LinkedIn. You guys have followings. If you see anybody that should be or could be a partner of ours, I don't need you to do an intro. I just need you to send me the URL.
Mm-hmm.
I just need you to send me the link. I basically tell them, like, this isn't a team sport, it's a company sport, right? So and I ask this of everybody. Sales team, hey, when you're talking to somebody, if they mention they're talking to a consultant, can you hook us up and let us know? Right? Or if they happen to be a customer and they should be a good partner, they could be a potentially good partner, pass it over. If I don't ask them of something, if they don't know how they can help me, they will never do it.
Yeah.
So take the opportunity when you have the audience to always ask them for something.
Yeah, awesome. I absolutely love that. Yeah, like, again, being prescriptive, just like letting people know that, hey, this is how you should be participating, or this is how you can help. That's like a good recurring theme through your work, which is awesome. So I want to talk about Sendoso a little bit, because I remember when you were at Sendoso, like, from a distance, being like, whoa, they're doing some really fucking cool integrations, pardon my language, but like, I remember several times being like, that is a crazy idea, like, how come I never thought about that? And so yeah, I would love to just hear, because obviously primarily agency services partners up until now, you're moving into a company where you're working more on integration type work. So I'd love to hear about how come integrations were a priority, and like what that landscape looked like, and then also like how some of these examples of really cool integrations you did, because I remember them being kind of game changing in my mind.
Yeah, they were. That one was a fun one because it was taking the methodology of really just partnerships, right? When you think of an organization and you think about partnerships, you think about like sometimes we get locked into this like, oh, agencies, right? The way that I like to look at it when I like consult clients is when they're looking at building a partner program, I tell them like, who we want to think outside the box of who's selling to our customer.
Yeah.
Who else is selling to our customers? So if you think about it from a dentist, right? You have the medical reps, you have all these different individuals. Like we could partner with everybody that is going after the doctor because that's who we want,
Yeah.
right? But sometimes we just go, oh, the medical rec or whatever they're called, the medication rep. I can't think of it. But yeah, that's kind of what we think is we get so pigeon in toe-tailed, whatever it's called, into just that one profile type. So what we did at Sendoso is really looked at this holistically and said, okay, what applications are our customers using?
Mm-hmm.
I started asking them and polling them. I sat down with the customer success team. I said, can you guys give me some data? I set up gong notifications. So anytime they mentioned any of these different platforms, I got notified. And so I could start seeing a consistency factor of like, here's what we're doing and here's what we're seeing and here's, what they're asking for. Then at that point in time, I changed my mind and thinking around I had to get a direct integration. I was running new integrations, multiple every single month, and people were like, "How are you doing this without any money and without support?" I said, "Because I'm using middleware," and they're like, "Oh, Zapier or PySync or that Workato." I'm like, "No, like HubSpot, like Salesforce," and they're like, "What do you mean?" We have an integration with HubSpot. They have an integration with HubSpot, so they can push the data in HubSpot, and HubSpot can trigger the send. Like, why do I need an integration at this point? What I need this flow to happen. I need customers to using, and I need data to say this is why it's working, and then I can justify an integration based on the data.
Yeah.
So I was just running these middleware type of relationships and getting them up, and then what we would do there is then we'd leverage Reveal, and we'd pull the data on these relationships to see who our customers were in common, and we'd run case studies, and we'd reach out to them and say, hey, we'd like to do a case study. And then we'd pull the integration partners as a part of that case study. They would share it and go to market, right? And so it's very much a marketing forward motion, I would say. But we try to think outside the box, right? And then on top of that, we also then said, how deep can we go on some of these partnerships? Like before I left, we were going deep in with Gong and their new platform, their new tool, where we were going to embed Sendoso in every account that got Gong. I don't remember what it was called. It was Engage or something.
Yeah.
And basically that would have been another game-changing opportunity. But none of this would happen. I came into for context, I came into Sendoso and I knew zero of those partners in that industry. So my goal was relationships. Get to know them, get an understanding of who these partners are, build those relationships, do what we do as partner professionals, which is build relationships, and see where is there opportunity for us to do more together and what is their definition of a good partnership. And so I just doubled down on that methodology and we came up with some really cool and creative ways to go to market with these different partner types. But I heavily used just our integrations we already built, middleware.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, it's very creative, I think. And because it probably helps that you came from the agency side first and you've seen a bunch of people like kind of not in a mean way, but like flake, on the partnership. So, hey, like if we spend 6 months working on this integration and like and they flake, like that's a huge bet that we've just made, and so being able to like validate the partnership with a pre-existing integration before making that investment seems really smart.
Yeah, and then once you have the case study information, if you're using Reveal, then you basically have now your prospects and their customers, and boom, now you're hitting them with this like, hey, you're a customer of blank. We have an integration. You should check it out. And so then you work closely. I was like working closely with marketing. We were doing probably, I would, if I remember correctly, it was like 70 to 75% of all of the marketing initiatives had a partner attached.
Wow.
So that if that gives you some perspective of like how deep the integration side of the house should be with marketing, it should be a really deep relationship and a go-to-market motion All of our happy hours, we had partners. All of the events that we did, we had partners involved. And so that's, and I hunted a lot of partners at events. I'd go booth to booth to booth and basically say like, should we be a partner? Does it make sense? Who is your ICP? Blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's awesome. And so so your priority was these integrations. Was the outcome you were driving for still like sourcing revenue, or was the measure of success something different at that point? If it was such an like such a ISV focus.
yeah, good question. I mean, initially when I came in, we were focusing on two things: sourced and influenced. Influence was a little bit, it's a topic obviously within the partner world of like, oh, it's a fluff metric and stuff like that. And arguably, I would say that's accurate in the sense of it's a fluff unless you can move it. And that's where you become game changer to say, no, 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 I just sent 190 succulents to HubSpot CSMs, and our calls with HubSpot mentions from third parties doubled. That is not a fluff metric. I legitimately influenced and moved an influence metric, which is in HubSpot is talking about us, right? So that's the difference between I think a lot of different ones is like I could move and mess with influence. I could take a partner that we were doing 30K with on influence and double that. So I basically what I did is I split the two and did two separate buckets in the sense of like what initiatives we did with this one and what initiatives we did with this one. Um, by the time I left, we were still looking at sourced and influenced. The difference was is we did make an aggressive shift to look more towards the source revenue, and what that looked like with marketing, because we did so much with marketing. Technically, it was sourced, but it was also with marketing. So it was like this. We figured out early on how to just do the relationship together. So we reported data together, and we were able to claim that as like sourced. So it's a little bit different, but we figured out how to make it work to still accelerate growth for Sendoso.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and we were like absolute power users of Gong at Deal as well. Like we would scour Gong and we would consider those referrals. Like where if someone was like,
Oh yeah,
hey, we heard about you guys from this company, like we would still go and reach out to the partner and kind of like validate it, but like we would consider that a referral still, because ultimately our goal wasn't like, hey, did they follow the process? It was, hey, like we want to measure referrals and then let's improve the process. Like obviously
yeah,
this is a process problem rather than a partner problem. If they're sending business to us but they're not doing it in the way that we want them to, it's like it's because we need to fix something ourselves rather than like we shouldn't give that partner credit.
yeah. Majority of the revenue is going to be sourced with tech partners because they have 30, 40 sales reps. Nobody's going to register deals on the tech side.
Yeah,
It's never going to happen.
yeah,
It's very much, and that's what we have to forget is that we have to think about it from a source is like we did this webinar, we did this event together, we did that kind of thing, right? The source methodology is a little different, in my opinion, with these tech partners because your motion is very much collaborative with marketing 99% of the time. Whereas with your agencies, that's a different game, right? Those are specifically they're going to register them and things like that, and hopefully they register them. And sometimes they don't, though, to your point, and they're saying, hey, so and so referred me. I caught all of that.
yeah,
And the reason why is because that is a source deal. But you can't trust, not saying anything bad about a sales rep. I was account executive. You were an account executive. We get it. We're in the thick of it. Somebody says they were referred by somebody, you're like, awesome. You're in it. You're not remembering to be like, hey, partner team, so and so referred them.
yeah, for sure.
I get it, which is the reason why we can't trust them. They're humans, and so it's gone for that
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. All right, well, unfortunately, we're coming up to our time. I promised you the time would go really fast, and it has gone really fast, which is kind of crazy. I like to end these conversations with a recurring question, and so would love to ask you, what's something that you have experienced or learned recently that you would like to share with the folks that are listening in today?
That's a good question. I gotta think on that one. I would say that I'll add this, and maybe it's not like mind blowing or anything like that, but as I work with the executive team here at teamwork.com, I realized early that I was using nomenclature and I was using vocabulary and certain things, and they're just like, Cory, that's great and all, but you gotta talk to us like we don't know anything.
Hmm.
about partnerships. And I realized that sometimes as partner leaders, and sometimes it's not intentional. It's just like we're talking here, IPP, this or that, or whatever it may be. And they're like, Cory, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And so I presented to the executive team and they're like, Cory, speak to us as though we know nothing. What is your strategy and how would you argue? And basically that's what I ended up doing is I just basically broke it down to say, here's who our partners are, here's what they do, here's why we're doing what we're doing. And it was really like in layman's terms. And sometimes we feel like we want to speak at that level because we have to. And you realize like you don't technically have to. You can just, articulate it this way and they'll still be fully supportive of your go-to-market motion. And them asking questions and challenging you is not a bad thing. That's what you want. That means they care. That means they're invested, right? And so that's what I learned again in this scenario was I was just riffing on all these like terminologies in our world, and they're just like, Cory, I have no idea what you're saying.
Yeah. You have to be really careful with that, right? It's like these things are shortcuts, which are great for like if me and you are having a conversation or where we have like a shared vocabulary, like you say. But for people from outside of the industry, it's just like incredibly unhelpful to go through those shortcuts. You need them to go along the journey with you. And so if you're saying IPP or like nearbound or co-selling or
Yes.
like all of these types of things, people are going to be like, I do not know what you're talking about, and you're just going to lose people so quickly. So that is a
Yes.
great learning. That's a really, really good one. Like in the crew, use the colloquialisms or whatever, and then when you're speaking to people outside of it, keep it really simple. I absolutely love that. Awesome. Well, Cory, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This was an amazing conversation. I know a lot of people are trying to figure out how to partner with agencies, so that's going to be a really interesting one for them to dive into. But lots of great stuff here as well. So appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. If anybody has any like questions, they want to pick my brain, like I'm open. Like I'll do a half an hour with you, no problem, if I can help at all. So
Amazing. And where's the best place for people to find you?
LinkedIn, it's going to be the easiest way. Direct message me, I'll respond. I'm on LinkedIn every single day. So that's going to be the easiest way to get me.
Amazing. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Cory.